All right. Okay, Peter, it's the last argument. What's this? Well, I love you too, honey, but okay, I'll read this while you're going because I'm probably not that interested in what you have to say anyway, so I'll check this out. Okay, so, Pete, I'm just joking.
I just want to ask if
you know I love you.
Sit down now, do I get the chance of more or less than 7? Okay, well, I'm going to plunge.
That's an interesting question. That was a good one.
I'm going to plunge in.
Should give Martha. Okay, go ahead.
The question we've been asked to debate is whether the broadcasting regulations, the distribution regulations are obsolete. Underlying that question, underlying everything we're talking about, are two other more important questions. That is broadcasting obsolete, and is the dream of Canadian broadcasting obsolete? Because those are the underlying questions that help us really grapple with this debate. I will agree with Lawson on one thing, and that is one gravitates from denial to thinking you're fracked to some kind of amorphous middle. And this debate about broadcasting is actually a debate we've been having quite seriously for the last decade, since the dot-com bubble, but also really a debate we've been having since the very existence of the broadcasting system. Because at the end of the day, we have to realize that we've had a luxury in the last couple of decades of a closed system that we never had before. The origins of the broadcasting system, if you go back 50 years, were the political will of starting something Canadian in the face of US border stations where the system was completely open. Canadians could access border stations from most parts of the country. The decision was made to create a Canadian broadcasting system in spite of that, not because of it. And what we're really returning to is that open system. And what we're returning to is not the death of broadcasting or necessarily the death of Canadian broadcasting, but a coexistence between a broadcasting system that brings some benefits and comes with it some obligations, and another system, another set of platforms that are unregulated, that are outside the scope that Canadians access and Canadians use. So the question really is in that coexistence, is there a role for Canadian broadcasting? Is there a role for regulation? My personal view is there very much is a role for both. And I want to take us back to really what broadcasting is about. And I think Glenn did a great job giving us a very concrete example. We've all heard people talk about medium emerging and not necessarily replacing earlier or prior media. The more interesting issue is understanding what media have that defines them, that makes them efficient. And when you look at broadcasting, it has many qualities that make it actually not only an efficient but a durable medium. And I want to touch on some of those. Glenn talked about the aggregating role. From a consumer perspective, rather than just thinking about broadcasting as a tyranny of scheduling, we got to recognize that it has some significant values. It is, of course, a very efficient way, and the only way you can get live events, whether it's a sports event or a news event. It is also a great way of creating an event. Canadians consume 22 hours of television a week. That hasn't changed. It has slightly dropped in younger demographics, but it hasn't changed. The ability to create an event around a television program, to tune into something, is a value. Yes, we now have greater opportunities to find a program when we're not sitting in front of our television set, but the fact remains that aggregation, that ability to create an event is very significant. Finally, we have, through television, created flow environments, specialty television, so whether you're into cooking or into music or into any one or other niche, you have a space that you can go to that's familiar to you, and Canadians have demonstrated and continue to demonstrate that they like that choice. We are, while debating the death of broadcasting, launching more and more digital channels that Canadians are interested in accessing. We've heard yesterday that technology is not the issue. Well, technology kind of is the issue. Because just because technologies allow certain capabilities doesn't mean they're cost effective and doesn't mean that all Canadians will gravitate to them. The reality of the broadcast technology is it's a very efficient and cost-effective means of delivery. While wireless networks and internet networks can deliver a certain amount of programming, they can't possibly, in anywhere near the future, duplicate the mass of volume of product that broadcasting delivers. And they certainly can't do it as cost-effectively. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the vested interests that make broadcasting a useful and durable medium. We've talked a lot about the unclarity, the lack of clarity in terms of business models in the new media space. In broadcasting, we know the business models, they work. We have advertising, we have subscription, and we have a system that actually does pay for content and quite frankly pays for the high quality content that all of you concern yourselves mostly with. To suggest that that system can be replicated and has no relevance in the future is not a particularly positive prospect for your businesses and the ability to have the funding that you want for the programming that you want to create. The other vested interest is very interesting, and that is the fact that we have got a system where the broadcasters and the ISPs are the same companies. They want both a broadcasting system and an internet system. They don't want consumers to move from one to the other. They want them to have both. And that ability to ensure, whether it be through pricing strategies, that the vast majority of Canadians continue to be part of both systems is an interest that is certainly an interest of those companies, and it's an interest that I think all of us share. The political will behind the Canadian broadcasting is something that we can question today. But the flip side of that, and I think Trina alluded to that this morning, is that while it may be difficult to grapple with new legislation and have government show leadership in a digital strategy, it's equally true that it's highly unlikely that the Broadcasting Act will disappear. As imperfect as it is still a piece of legislation that the Commission can work with and will work with. And that legislation is not about to disappear. And that legislation and the political will that goes behind it means, certainly in my view, that the social and economic and cultural benefits that we've seen in broadcasting will be seen to want to endure and to continue to benefit this sector and Canadians. So the final point, I think, about looking at the future is to look at this codependence, this coexistence of broadcasting other platforms, to not assume the death of TV, but to use, I think, the term that many people are starting to use, which is TV everywhere. Yes, an industry that we're going to have to relook at in terms of the measures that we use to regulate, the incentives that we create, the balance of obligations and benefits, and also recognize its diminishing capacity to support certain kinds and certain levels of production. But it is something worth keeping. We will muddle through, probably with imperfect legislation, probably with mistakes, but the broadcasting system will survive. The Canadian broadcasting system will survive, and it'll remain, for the foreseeable future, an important cornerstone of your industry and this country.
Thank you. Now, you'll recall a skater did not finish on time the other night and had deductions. The judges, I will leave. We don't have any official rules, but I just point that out. All right, judges, let's have your scores, please. Paul, 7. Sandra, I can't see that. What is that? Still can't. 7.5? 8.5. And what's your name, actually, by the way? Tim. Tim. Okay. No, 8.5 from Tim. If you prefer Simon, I could stick with Simon, but okay. All right, so we have finished the first half. Hold on a second here. Carry the 3, 7, 7.5, 8.5. This would make for exciting television, I can tell you that one. 15, 16, 23. Just like breakfast television, actually.
Hi, Mom.
I'm glad no breakfast television person is a judge, Michael. That's all I can